Hello, friends. It is Thursday, the 26th of February, 2026, and I am sitting somewhere in Hollywood. Shout out to my bestie, Sue Wong, who has given me one of her amazing residencies whilst I've been here. I have Scott McKay on his way, flying in right now. He'll be arriving at about 5 p.m. this afternoon. A little too late to make an appearance on Lazarus, alas. And I also have the great Rick Levine arriving at 3 p.m. shortly after I finish up here to have tea and scones with me. So I intend to get to a full catch up with Rick on the planetary status. He was at the Conscious Life Expo a few days ago, graciously introducing me and my talk on stage. And I did a piece on the geometry of revelation, which is what my current shtick is all about. I will be repeating more or less that same lecture next weekend in Florida at the New Life Expo, and then I'll be heading back momentarily to base camp in Bacalar Laguna in Mexico and be doing some broadcasting from there. I was asked by a number of people to show the award. That's the award that I was given. It says the Truth Seekers Award for Fearless Pursuit of Deeper Truths. Well, there you go. I'm certainly not the only one. My first guest today on Lazarus, I've been looking forward greatly to meeting this guy, and I'm delighted to know. I regard him as a closet researcher. We just had this conversation a moment ago, and he's going to be dragged out kicking and screaming into the daylight, whether he likes it or not now. People are beginning to take his work pretty damned seriously, as indeed they ought. Again, I'm not going to go into a big spiel here about the status quo and about the abject psycho-civilizational fuckery that we find ourselves in, because we are at that event horizon. We are no longer approaching it. And we are, all of us, more or less on the precipice of being forced to stand absolutely naked in the reckoning of who we are, who we think we are, what kind of a world we think we live in, who informed the narrative, what confluence of witchery, galactic and temporal, has cascaded down into the status quo. Because sure as hell, we can no longer look to the Catholic Church or to the corporations masquerading as governments or to any of the institutions in the world that are out there to protect and defend us against ourselves. All of that nonsense is crumbling, and the collapsing of that monumental Babylonian edifice is what revelation is all about. So when I talk about the geometry of revelation, it's really not to do with a conversation about what's happening out there and how we can deduce it or how we can decode it. That's part of it. It really comes to you as the witness and the lens through which you perceive reality. That's the important piece to me, because the reckoning must be had within each of us in order to activate that immanent flame, that true reckoning, that true event horizon, which is the relationship with self, which is to say, the transmutation and transcendence of an egoic, materialistic, 3D temporal relationship with yourself and reality, and to move that into the immanent, into union with the divine. That's how we then see the world through the eyes of a child, as I keep repeating that wonderful little statement. Seeing the world through the eyes of a child, for me, is what 2026 is all about. And how better to do that than to sit upon the grass and recognize the fact that almost everything we've been informed about history, about culture, about the civilizational wheels, about so-called reality, is a fallacy. And these are narratives and stories and agendas which are, in the main, conspiracies in the truest sense of the word conspire. These are Babylonian, black hat elites over millennia who have variously construed how to drip feed a given reality to humanity. Why, you ask, would anyone go to such great extents? Well, in order to harvest the life force of humanity. Because if you can indenture millions, hundreds of millions, billions of souls incarnationally into the wheel of samsara, we are allowing our life force, cycle after cycle, to be abnegated and abdicated. And so when we're not sitting on our divine thrones, we are abdicating them, and we are abnegating and surrendering life force up into the ethers. And that is the harvest. That is the stuff. That is the primal stuff. So money, time, fear, all of those equations are really the net of what I'm talking about. But my guest upcoming in a moment is going to try his best to elucidate the subject at hand and to enlighten us as to the correcting of history. And I'm very, very happy to introduce to you, friends, Guy Anderson. Thank you for joining us today, Guy.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let me start by saying for more than 3 decades, Guy has explored the outer edges of suppressed history, from lunar deception to lost continents. Yet nothing, he argues, compares to the magnitude of the Tartarian reset. So in this segment, Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, he lays out a sweeping forensic reconstruction of a global civilization deliberately erased from both record and landscape, and through impossible architecture, repurposed world fairs, orphan trains, atmospheric energy systems, and the silencing, of course, of that late great Tartarian Nikola Tesla. Guy makes the case that the 18th and 19th centuries were not an era of progress, as we've been led to believe, but an era of replacement. The industrial age did not rise from ingenuity alone. It rose from the ruins of something far, far older. And today's conversation is going to move beyond curiosity and into consequence. So we're confronting the reset now that shaped the world we now inhabit. Is that a fair enough introduction, Guy?
That's a fantastic introduction. Yes, you've hit the nail perfectly on the head.
Well, the obvious question is, what is it that grabbed your attention in the first place and then detours your life into becoming one of the preeminent deep dive researchers into this extraordinary subject, which is, in my view, the very tip of the spear of what we call revelation?
Yes, it's strange, isn't it? Because of all of the conspiracies that I've researched, why this one? And it wasn't until I had a session with Elizabeth Hancock, who I understand you've spoken to. She does past life regression, and I was on the fence with it. I'm open to everything. I never dismiss anybody's views or thoughts on anything at all, and with an open mind, I allowed her to put me under, and within moments, I found myself as this red-headed, sort of striking 9-foot giant wandering around the fields in what appeared to be Russia, and I had cattle. I was surrounded by cattle, and I had a log cabin and a wife and 3 daughters, and everything seemed to be wonderful. And then all of a sudden, in the sky, there were what appeared to be meteorites. I actually think that these were some kind of direct energy weapons that then hit the earth for as far as I could see into the distance, and everywhere was suddenly on fire. And I turned, and my log cabin, my home was on fire, and my wife and my children were in it. And I started running, and Elizabeth said to me, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to Agartha." And she said, "Why there?" I said, "I'm going for help. They're killing Tartaria." So I wonder if I'm carrying genetic memory, if this has been passed down to me. And that's why it resonates, because Max Egan introduced me to Tartaria back in late 2019. And as I said to you earlier on, you know, I've been looking into conspiracy theories for a very, very long time. Why this one? I think I have a connection to it. I think I'm carrying some kind of genetic memory passed down from my ancestors, and that my job is to set the record straight.
I love that. I absolutely love that. God, this speaks, honestly, Guy, I wasn't expecting that to be the opening salvo, but that speaks absolutely to everything that I'm understanding about it. And let me just say, let me also give a shout out here to Max Egan, because it was Max who first popped my cherry on the subject in my living room in London. And this was definitely either 2015 or 2016, just before he came out and stayed with me. I think he was in Bali in 2016. Max Egan was, for me, the man. And I remember him looking at me with his kind of wizard face in my evening, going, with his bifocals and saying, have you heard of Tartaria? And I was like, what? No, who? What? Sounds like a French dish, And he told me about it. And I obviously immediately just, whatever, Max. Yeah, nice. Let's move on. And how that has come back to haunt me over the years. It didn't take me long, mind you, to start looking into it. But thank you for raising the specter of Max in this, because I do believe he was probably the first real researcher in this in our kind of
Yes.
source. So I thank him for that. The other piece you mentioned was about your carrying the genetic codes. And the reason why I think it's so important, that piece, Guy, is because my understanding of the changing of the geometry of light that is happening right now as we move through the ecliptic into the age of Aquarius after a galactic sleep cycle, like 12, 13,000 year sleep cycle, is as we're moving in now to the so-called galactic day, the geometry of light is a kind of hyperdimensional plasma photonic field that we pass through on our descent into the semi-arc, a descent of the grand precession of the equinox about 12, 13,000 years ago, which was the Great Deluge. And, God knows when or where Tartaria came between that epoch and this epoch. I want to hear your take on that. But the point being, we left our memory behind in the end of those past epochs. Our memories were accreted into the ethers, so to speak, the photonic band. Now, as the geometry of light changes, souls like you, clearly purified, are able to reconvene with that memory bank. And it's a pure quantum phenomenon. But I think you approach the subject with tremendous modesty and humility. In any event, can I just ask you a first leading question? When, in your view, between what year and what year was the epicenter of the Tartarian legend or mythos?
Well, I think it's connected to, and a lot of people that follow the Bible, and I'm again, that's something that I sit very much firmly on the fence with. They connect it to the millennial reign of Christ, and this is 1,000 years where Jesus and the angels and the saints, they ruled, and everything was built in harmony. We were living in a higher vibration, a much higher frequency, and the architecture was designed to resonate and harmonize with us and with the earth itself. So that goes back, if we look at when it's possible Jesus was actually born, it would be 25 BC, and the millennial reign would have ended in 976 AD or BC, or CE. If you look into the work of Anatoly Fomenko, he believes that 800 years have been added to our timeline, sort of a phantom period. So we're given this sort of slow progress where we go from almost, inventing the wheel to where we are now, removing any possibility of more advanced civilizations existing before. Therefore, 1776, the year that New World Order began, obviously depicted on the Statue of Liberty and the back of the American dollar bill, would actually have been 976, 1,000 years after the birth of Jesus. So that's the period of time, and that's information that I haven't come up with myself. That's actually researching Anatoly Fomenko, the first person really to put pen to paper and talk about Tartaria.
So that 1776, which I also earmark as being really the demise of the last great refraction of the golden age, and then recodified as the onset of a diabolical, call it what you will, archonic patriarchy, which emerges through Cartesian logic and Darwinianism and Einsteinian Newtonian relativism and Newtonian physics and Einsteinian logic. So all of that stuff, which I refer to as the dust of empire now, we look back at those archetypal patriarchal figures. And do you believe that clique that I just mentioned of, let's say, Newton, Darwin, Einstein, Locke, and so on, do you believe that lot were part of a kind of midnight Mason brigade, essentially, that they were Babylonian priests in a sense, creating the new metric and installing the new metric? Or do you think that they were just sort of happenstance figures that emerged with a certain logic and left their mark on the world? I'm very interested in this particular subject because there's only a dozen or so figures that determined this new age with their writings and their intellectuality. What is your take on that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that I think that I don't want to say psyop. That's the wrong word. But I think that they are stooges. I think that they were created. Whether or not some of these people actually even existed is difficult to know. Obviously, we know Einstein did, but there are people out there that believe that the information he was given was handed to him by his first wife, who worked in the patent office, and he's a very strange character. But with Darwin, the research that I've done into that man suggests that actually he was provided the origin of species by the Vatican, and he was given the task to present it because that man was known to partake in incest, and actually petitioned Parliament for them to make it legal. So for him to be talking about the origin of species and the theory of our evolution on one hand, but practicing something that defies it on the other, I think is one hell of a red flag. So there is research out there conducted by lots of people to suggest that he was funded by the Vatican, that his name was put to work done by other people, perhaps a committee, and he was the person that was given the job of presenting it. So yes, I think a lot of these people may or may not have even existed, Newton being another one of them.
Oh, this is so interesting. May or may not have existed. Well, we've covered the Renaissance with Jane Evershed, who's one of our proteges with Lazarus, and she'll almost certainly be watching right now. And Jane did some extraordinary research into the Renaissance, and we discovered through her findings, it appears that the Renaissance itself was a complete conflation, right? And what do you know about that?
Yes, I agree. And these are the phantom periods of time that Anatoly Fomenko has written about. And also people that may not have existed, that I touched on a moment ago. He suggests that Napoleon could well be another example of that. That actually they've put a name, Apollyon. They've put a name to
Apollo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So if you want to blame someone, rather than blame yourself, the people that write the history can attach a person to it that's very difficult to trace. We can't exactly go knocking on the door of his great grandchildren and asking to see memoirs and diaries and so, because they don't exist. He had one son that survived to the age of 22. By 25, he's the most powerful man in France, and on his day off, he's writing poetry and romantic novels. I think that's what they've done. I think they've given us people so they can attach events and works to. And this may also be the same for Shakespeare. I personally think it is.
Yeah.
But this is heavily influenced by
Right.
Anatoly Fomenko. And I know I keep talking about him, but for me, once Max had got me on board with Tartaria, and I did contact him way back then and said, I'm telling people about Tartaria, but no one's listening to me. And he said, if you could just wake one soul up, brother, you could have saved a life. So I kept pushing.
Yeah.
And then I stumbled across Anatoly Fomenko. His work on the timeline falsification, which incidentally, 1776, the start of New World Order, is also referred to as Satan's Little Season. His first book was New Chronology, where he outlines these phantom periods and phantom people. And then he actually moves into to Tartaria in other works, one being The Issue with Tartaria, which is a book I'm currently reading. So, he's done the legwork. And what I tend to do in my work is take a very complicated book, break it down to the pure nuts and bolts, and then share the information with people that just would not digest it otherwise.
Very good. And you know, the piece about Napoleon Bonaparte shredding the myth there, I just occurred to me, there must be 12 million people out there you've absolutely crushed because they are absolutely convinced that they were a reincarnation of Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, so many people, it's so true, psycho-intellectually and even spiritually, peg themselves to these Vatican-inspired icons. And that was always the thing. I remember in I can't remember the name of the place. I was doing a lecture in Dartington Hall, I think it was, in your part of the world. Have you heard of Dartington Hall?
I have, yes.
Right. Yeah, I was doing a lecture there about 12, 13 years ago, maybe a bit longer. And I remember speaking to this particular subject. And on the big screen, I threw up an image of Mother Teresa and of Che Guevara as being archetypal Vatican-inspired motherfuckers. In my view, no, I know I'm right about this, but the classic, you know, to be able to construe and conflate a figure like a Che Guevara with his little rebel hat on and his handsome face and turn that into a kind of Warhol, thumbprint icon, and then franchise that to the youth of the world through populism. And that, how easy it is to do that, to create a multi-billion-dollar engine just off an idea of one image and one false narrative that he was the counterculture hero. No, he wasn't. He was a piece of shit, murderous rat bastard who liked murdering women and children. That's the truth of the matter. And he was a Jesuit-inspired Sabbatean junkie as well. So we've got that piece taken care of. Let's move him out the way. Mother Teresa, let's begin. I was talking about her 15 plus years ago. Obviously, I was thrown out of dinner parties and what have you at that time. But that's a classic case in point when you understand the connection between Mother Teresa and Anthony Fauci and the transgender, that helter-skelter Illuminati language, that Saturnian Illuminati language that they bring in with these kinds of archetypes, rather like Brigitte Macron and others. But speak to that subject momentarily, because I think it's connected also to the erasure of our memory.
Yes, I totally agree. I totally agree. And that's been going on for a very long time. And that has progressed recently to the World Economic Forum platform, the stage. And we've got someone who 5 minutes ago people wouldn't have considered to be a mind, David Beckham, Sir David Beckham.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that we have. We've reached a point where you no longer have to have knowledge of a particular subject. You don't even necessarily be having to tell people the truth. If you're famous enough and have a big enough following, people will believe whatever you tell them and they'll follow you. And I think that that's what they've done, because we've lost faith in those of us that had any to start with, in the system, in the bureaucrats, in the think tanks, the governments and the world leaders. There are people out there that are very patriotic, and there are a lot of people in America that fly the stars and stripes and believe everything that Trump says and that he's the hero. But for many people, we've lost faith in this, and they need to get us back on board. So they do it by introducing other figures to us that we can resonate with. And Che Guevara is one. Mother Teresa obviously was one. And now it's the celebrity, although it's the wrong word. You know, why would we ever celebrate these, in my opinion, archons? You know, they are not icons and they are not iconic. They are archons and they are archonic. And they are doing the devil's work. They are putting out there the information that these think tanks and the Vatican and the Jesuits and the Sabbateans want us to hear through a medium in which most people that wouldn't normally receive this information are now fixated upon it because they pick it up on their feed. They're doom scrolling on TikTok or Facebook, and they are now being presented with people like David Beckham and Angelina Jolie participating in, you know, trilateral commission meetings and presentations. And I think that's where we are now. We live in a world where you do not have to be right. You don't even have to know what you're talking about. You just have to be popular, and the sheep will follow.
Yeah, exactly to what I was saying at my preamble, that it's all about the harvest of humanity through plasma, through attention, through light focus, to where we choose to abnegate and abdicate sovereignty and true conscience or consciousness, place our attention onto false light idols, and are sucked therefore into that, and we manifest the egregore and the very thing that then devours us. So well stated. If you had a if you had to pick a single category of evidence that first convinced you that something was fundamentally wrong, and that you think that is derailing most people in academia, proving out that something is foundationally wrong with the official timeline, do you think it would be the subject of architecture, or of or of maps, and or encyclopedias, or the engineering inconsistencies? What is the crack in the facade that you believe is going to lead to this cascade of revelation?
That's a difficult question to answer, because you actually presented all of the fundamentals behind it. I mean, first of all, we do have the maps, maps and atlases, and that's where I started when I wanted to look into this more closely. I started purchasing old maps and encyclopedias, and one moment we've got Tartaria, and the next Tartaria is gone, and it's now Mongolia. And we're told, according to the narrative, that Mongolia was a barren land with nomads roaming, but there are capital cities, and the old maps show structures, palaces, and temples. So I started to think that, okay, that there's something not quite right here. And people were telling me that it's pseudoscience, that it never existed. Yet I have atlases and encyclopedias with its flag, with population figures, and even breaking down their religion and their belief systems, and the percentages that follow different beliefs. But the architecture stands out perhaps more because it's present everywhere. That what we see is these Greco-Romanesque buildings that are inspired by the Vatican, in many cases, are present in countries that had no communication, that didn't share these blueprints or this technology or ethos, and they're present all over the world. Even in places like Tasmania and the outback of Australia, there are these incredible structures, and there isn't a logical explanation because they appeared overnight. When you look at the narrative provided by places like Wikipedia and Google, they'll tell you who the architect was, but they never tell you where the stone was quarried from, who the masons were, where the actual workforce came from, and where did they all stay. So for each building, they'll say, well, they imported the labor, people traveled to help with the construction. But what they don't tell you is at exactly the same time, in the towns these people came from, the same structures were appearing there as well. So we've got an incredible amount of buildings that appear at the same time across the world that look almost identical. Today they are prisons, orphanages, and asylums. Red brick with stone detailing, white stone detailing, they are everywhere. And then we had the Lunacy Act, which appeared overnight, late 1700s, early 1800s. All of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of people are being incarcerated that weren't a decade earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've started to do the maths on this, and I'm looking at why we had an immediate need to lock people away for the most incredible reasons. So the architecture is very strange. That the location of these buildings doesn't stack up. There are no records. I mean, take the Statue of Liberty, for example. There isn't a single documented case of someone being admitted to hospital during its construction. Wooden ladders, ropes, and pulleys.
Yeah.
Somebody got injured, somebody died.
Right.
Nothing at all. They'll tell you who built it. They'll tell you that it was from a gift from France at a time that it was bankrupt.
Yeah.
But they won't tell you who actually worked on it. That there are no records for any of this. And often with World's Fairs, which is perhaps one of the strangest anomalies, the World's Fairs and Expositions, they credit them to an architect that had never actually designed anything before. One minute they're working on their family farm, the next minute they're given the contract to design a small city.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, monumental citadels were
Mm,
constructed and architectured using all these classic and iconic architectural forms, and the complexity of those designs, staggering. Would have taken 100 years just to design them on paper, let alone build them.
yeah, I totally agree. And most of them destroyed within months of opening.
Right, exactly. I mean, and
Yeah.
we're everywhere. I mean, pretty much. I
Yeah.
don't know about world fairs in Africa. I don't know about that, but I know about through North America and throughout Europe and Eurasia.
Yeah, it is everywhere. Yeah, destroyed everywhere. London is a good example. The British Franco exhibition in the early 1900s is exactly where the BBC's headquarters now stand,
Right.
which has and their headquarters has an inner and outer circle and a statue in the middle of Helios.
Well, there you have it.
Which, yeah, so
There you have it. The Baal Broadcasting
yeah,
Corporation.
yes.
Yeah.
I call it blatantly buggering children. But yeah, I like that one.
Okay.
I might have to borrow that.
So I did some illustrations. Is that there? These are actually extracts from my standard lecture that I'm doing at the moment. But I just want to run them by you, because what I was doing is inputting a fair bit of data and seeing what my dear friend and avatar, who's called Kai, what he would come up with. But yeah,
Fantastic.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what we think of when we don't talk just about Tartaria, but we start thinking about Atlantis. You see, that image there is exactly where I was, where she is stood when Elizabeth Hancock conducted the past life regression with me. That is exactly where I was. That's actually really, really strange seeing that.
That's magnificent.
Because I lived in that house, that wooden log cabin behind. I lived in there.
Gosh.
But the only difference is my wife actually looked strikingly similar to Dawn French. I don't know why. I don't know where that came from.
I'm just not going to make any comment there at all. Let me move swiftly on to some of these other images here, Guy. Yeah, these are the chaps that I conjured up in this illustration. Responsible in my view for the auto-destructive of our golden age and the memory thereof.
Yes, perfect.
And it's
Absolutely
such a curiosity. Perfect. And Newton, of course, who's lionized at being, I think he did everything before the age of 27 or something insane. But it's not just improbable or implausible. It is patently impossible that he did and accomplished what he was said to have or purported to have accomplished. Here's another
totally
image.
Agree.
This is a very evocative image as well, I think.
And this is what I see, and I eat, breathe, and yeah, my life is really controlled by Tartaria, and this is what I see. These images are fantastic. I actually have one of those, and that's how I believe it looked.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I worked a long time to coax these images, asking for specific kind of chiaroscuran light forms and what have you. But I think it does pretty much illustrate it. Here, I want to speak to this. Doomsday, 1066. This to me is a very, very important nexus point. And what is it that you can tell about, or that you know about, the transfer from the centurion, from the Caesars of Rome through to Charlemagne, and then to Doomsday, William the Conqueror?
Yeah, see, that's a bit of a hot topic, isn't it? Because there are a lot of people out there that don't actually believe that the Doomsday book is real, that it is actually genuine, that it's another falsification we've been presented with, and I lean towards that. And again, I keep mentioning the same person, Anatoly Fomenko, but he is the person that has suggested that these characters are fictitious. These events never took place. We've just padded out our history with events that satisfy people's minds, that tick boxes and fill in blanks and explain pivotal moments that lead to where we are today. And I've got to admit, I'm not convinced that, and I've been to see it. I'm not convinced it's a genuine document that I'm looking at.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty damn fascinating. Pretty damn fascinating. The cathedrals again. You mentioned this a little earlier, that we're going back and researching the building of cathedrals and some of these monumental edifices, and we're discovering that there's no ledgers, no accounting, no receipts, no invoices, no workers' bills paid. What were these? How did but it does raise the specter of the guild and the guilds that existed, which weren't premised on monetary exchange. It was a whole different kind of meritocratic complex of traveling artisans, masons with their master masons going and undertaking this goodly, godly work. And they would stay in accommodations and digs that the guilds would supply to them. And the master guildsmen, of course, were staying in the more opulent and luxurious and well-appointed accommodations and being fed better. But that was part of the meritocratic system. Whereas if you were just starting out at the age of 16 or 17, you were obviously sleeping in the stable on straw. But that was kind of how it evolved, more or less, so we're told, about the guild system, that it was a very inwardly contained, contributionist, meritocratic social ecology and economic system, whereupon people's artisanship and craftsmanship was the thing that was elevated and became preeminent, which is why they were so staggeringly exact and talented in what they were doing. Do you buy into any of that stuff, or do you think that was part of just the construing of the narrative?
No, I do. And I think that this is the origins of Freemasonry. And I joined in my 30s hoping that I would find out exactly how they shared sacred geometry. And this goes back to Hiram Abiff. And you have it, the architect of King Solomon's Temple. Obviously, I've been asked not to return. I'm no longer welcome. And I joined the lodge at Great Queen Street, the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom. So I was privy to all sorts of goings on, from Knights Templars to, the Prime Minister's advisors who I'd sit and have a drink with. And they shared all sorts of information with me, but unfortunately not what I thought I was going to find out by joining. And so I think that this is how it works. And was until, I believe, Freemasonry was hijacked by the Jesuit order, that it was a shared knowledge. You started off as an entered apprentice in Freemasonry, and the same as a stonemason. You progressed to fellow craft and then became a master mason, and you had 33 degrees. When you reached the top, the 33rd, that is when you became perhaps privy to everything. And this is, I think, occulted knowledge, understanding of cymatics and frequency. Sacred geometry, that working with the golden ratio, getting buildings constructed where ley lines meet, and getting them to resonate. So you could take a city like this, for example, and draw with a ruler and a pen lines connecting each building, and find that every single time we're at 33 degrees. And that we are forming equilateral triangles by connecting these, and we're building a grid, almost something that looks like a circuit board. And each building is placed where we would have a dob of solder that connects the next part. And this is what I think was being shared through Freemasonry. And this, I think, is going back to the times of Atlantis. And that the Slavic Aryans were passing this information on. The Aryans being lordly, priestly, their true meaning. And this is what I believe was one of the reasons that Freemasonry was intercepted. So it could then be used really as a tool. And I think that that's where we see this switch, and suddenly a connection to the Knights Templar and the worship of Baphomet and so on. I think that they infiltrated that as well. They took the sacred geometry, they took the information, and the Freemasons that were once there understanding and learning sacred geometry just become the foot soldiers for a much bigger system that, in a similar way to religion, has been weaponized.
Indeed, indeed. This is the image that I created. Yeah, there we go. It's a montage. And again, this is just a question that I've got. I'm really studying this hard, and I want to understand the direct connection between the Caesars of Rome and the enthronement, coronation of Charlemagne, which I deem to be a signature nexus point. And then, of course, William the Conqueror and Doomsday Book. And the reason I think this is important is because, especially in the modern context, is because it seemed to have been these civilizational onset, or our civilizational wheel, the onset of registrations and tabulations. And I can't underscore how important I think that piece is. The business of registrations becoming systemic and endemic in our culture and in the whole social construct was all about the offering of babes up to Baal and to Cronus, the titan that devours its own young. When we register, we are offering up to Regus, which is Rex. Rex is the king. The king wears the crown. The crown is Cronus. Cronus is the titan that devours its own young. And we keep coming back to this perennial harvest of humanity, sacrifice of innocence, wheel of samsara, and so on. So to me, the registration of land and souls, registering your children at birth, classic case in point. Tabulating, registering your land, getting licenses for fucking bicycles and tractors and everything that's the insanity to me. When we took the reality and had to codify it into sigil, into word, into calculus, into number, into ledgers, that to me is the abomination. That was the separation of the fabric of vibral, dynamic, divine soul into logic and linear tracks and containment, enclosures, ownership. And obviously that's then the provenance of the devil, So what do you think about that? Doomsday Book to me is so important for that very reason.
I think you're right. And you mentioned something interesting a moment ago about licenses. And if you look at a license, just as one example, a license is permission to do something that would be illegal otherwise.
Right.
Now, that's strange when you actually look at it that way. Yeah. It is illegal to do something unless you pay for a license and register, and now you can perform an illegal act.
Right.
It was considered to be an illegal act yesterday before you had this document. But the registration of us at the Vatican, many people believe coincides with the Great Fire of London. Mm-hmm. And if we say, okay, they've falsified our timeline, and Anatoly Fomenko and people that have researched the same the same theory are correct, then it stands to reason that you can't just bolt on 800 years everywhere. You can't add 800 years to a document or a building, but you can add a 1 to the front of it.
Yes.
Which would make the Great Fire of London in 1666 would have taken place in the year 666.
Right.
And that is the year that everybody living on our realm was declared dead, lost at sea and deceased.
Yeah.
And we all became a fiction, a legal fiction. And that ties in perfectly. Again, it's the Jesuits, it's the Vatican, all roads leading to Rome.
Yeah, don't start me on that subject, please. I was at the Vatican beginning of last year, precisely in order to connect in with the last cardinal there. I'm not going to name him here, who is still alive by the grace of God, albeit on life support and in his late 90s. And he's the cardinal in the Vatican who I will name once he dies. And I will come out with a shattering story. But he's the cardinal who was feeding information to me in 2020, 2021 onwards about COVID, preempting pretty much everything that happened. And it's an extraordinary story. But he did tell me that the last question I put to him was, how many of the cardinals in the College of Cardinals does he believe are not practicing Satanists? And he categorically said he is the last of them that is not a Satanist. And he explained,
Wow.
told me the code words that are being used in the Vatican to signal the Babylonian orgies and the papal crypts every couple of weeks, and that these cardinals are running around in the enclaves with their little eunuch boyfriends on chains, and it's a homosexual sodomite fantasia now. Extraordinary stuff. In any event, whilst we're on that the subject, for my audience, the word fuck is an acronym for fornication under consent of the king, F-U-C-K. This is well known, incidentally, but that's a classic case in point, isn't it, guys?
Absolutely.
That the word fuck is supposed to be the kind of threshold event of like, okay, now you've tipped from sensibility and sensitivity into, but actually the reason why I drop F-bombs all the time and C words now is because the word cunt is an extension of Kunte, the high priestesses of the ancient Sumerian epoch, who were the most hallowed and beatific and extraordinary females. And they were the highest wisdom keepers and record keepers of the Sumerian times. And the Kunte of the past age have been, again, the Babylonian linguistics have flipped that Kunte into the term, the latter day term cunt, which is supposed to be a kind of desecration of the female reproductive organ. It's just that the Babylonian helter-skelter is so staggering. But again, this is why I personally drop these words nowadays in language, because I also believe that, I know that the English language has emerged as a Saturnian Babylonian linguistic assault against our true angelic sentience. And in fact, we're going to be doing a piece on this on the Lazarus Symposium shortly, on the English language as being actually the construed language in that sense of the Saturnian in our midst. Do you know anything about that?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I talk about this quite often, that the way in which words have been used to deceive us. And the C word is an interesting one, because in legal terms, it's someone you hold in high contempt, which in that case would be anybody in a government position.
Right.
But some of the words that we use in everyday language are unusual. And I've looked into this, and I haven't got to the bottom of it. But my first curiosity was the word united. The United States, the United Kingdom, but it starts with undo, untie, to take apart. And I broke it down. And we say that we live in the United Kingdom, or we must unite, and we are united. But it actually means to not belong to anywhere. But my favorite is antibiotic. In plain sight, telling you that this is against humanity, and you're prescribed it. And I think that is so clever. They have used language to trick us.
Yes.
And we are casting spells. We learn spelling. It's all witchcraft. And I think with the sole purpose of actually causing ourselves problems.
Well, dissonance.
I think our language has disconnected us.
Yes, because that dissonance, cultural dissonance, is what precisely brings about the tear in the fabric of society, community, and family, and then relationships that we have one to another. So the pornographicizing of reality, and certainly of sexuality, which is so stark and so technical now, is an assault against relationship between Shiva and Shakti, between the masculine and the feminine. So yes, indeed, you're absolutely bang on. This, incidentally, Guy, is an image that I conjured at the end of all of my stuff on the desecration of history. And as we move into the age of true revelation, or the geometry of revelation, as I call it, because it's all about your witness in the living moment, and how we can return to innocence in any given moment in so-called time, in point of fact, by becoming timeless in the instant, in the moment of now, is how we transcend time. And in so doing, activate that higher dimension, the higher octave of our expression, then move into reclaiming our capacity to anchor reality and into project, embody, enact, and then manifest patterns of perfection into this world as a divine child of God, son and daughter of God, but not of the dogmatic Christian or Buddhist or
Yes.
Islamic sense, because that's all abject idolatry. We're all wise enough to know that now. I wanted to show you one other thing, get your comment on it. That's this image here, because I wanted to also just explore the majesty and the multi-dimensionality of a single human cell. And the fact that, we know in human DNA, we know that human DNA is a fractal antenna, and that it connects us to the galactic spheres, and that the human being, the human body temple, is the galactic hybrid. That's crystal clear. We know that now. But do you believe that, or do you sense that foundational emergence of the wisdom flame is upon us, where we begin to remember the true immanent majesty of who we are? Is this all about remembrance? Is this all a grace point as we move into true revelation, which is, let's speak in terms of the mechanics of ascension into the immanent immortal realms? Do you believe we're heading back now, if not hurtling back into the immanent immortal paradigm?
I do. Yes, I truly do believe that. But I don't think that everybody is going to be joining us. I think that I do believe Dolores Cannon is right, that there are a vast number of people, perhaps 50 to 80% of the population, where this isn't possible. The ones that will willingly roll up their sleeve and take the next medical intervention, or go to the polling station, not realizing that actually it's two cheeks of the same arse. And every now and again a new figure like a Farage appears as the sphincter, but it's the same arse that we are voting for, with the strings being pulled, from far higher above. And so I think that we're going to struggle to get everybody on board. And I wonder if some people say, and I think this is perhaps harsh, that the pandemic was an IQ test.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes, the thought comes into my mind, that what if this was put in place actually by the good guys, the white hats, if you want to refer to them as that, in a way in which they could determine who could ascend and who could not. Because perhaps not everybody can join us to this next stage. And these are what we would refer to as the NPCs. I believe that they carry no genetic memory that exists pre the 1800s. And if they go onto ancestry.com, for example, to search for their DNA, and they send their sample off in the hope that search connects them to other family trees and fills in some blanks for them, that what they're being presented with is probably fictitious. So the reason that you're doing what you're doing, I'm doing what I'm doing, and Max and David Icke and Billy Carson and so on, that we're doing all this, is because I think we have this connection. It's very much present. And more people that have that connection, that were perhaps on the fence, distracted because of life's pressures, the cost of living, and so on, and the bombardment of news, never good, that now they're actually looking at things differently. Because once you are awake, then nothing is the same. Your life changes completely. You stop participating, don't you, in playing their games. You don't watch certain programs or listen to certain music, and perhaps even spend time talking to friends that you once spent a lot of time with. Everything changes, and I think it's a big commitment to wake up fully and to sever those connections.
Quite so. I don't want to let you off the hook yet, because I need to still get stuff out of your brain, because this, technically we were going to talk about the Cabbage Patch Kids. And so I think we really do need to put a critical focus on here for a little moment. We've discussed, reset mechanisms, mud floods, fires, administrative amnesia. In your view, mud floods, well, we know that mud floods occurred. We have forensic evidences of that. What era did they largely happen in? Presumably, it was a very short span of time where
Yeah.
seismic frequency weapons or such like were unleashed and brought about these cataclysms. When do you imagine that occurred?
I think during the 1700s into the 1800s, the Napoleonic Wars, I think, were a classic example of that. So if we look around 1811, particularly going into 1812, the comet that's referred to as Napoleon's comet, that appeared to cause incredible destruction. I think that was direct energy weapons. I think that is what I saw when I actually experienced past life regression, and I could see these fireballs coming from the sky. I think, I'm not saying that we were nuked, but I think something similar took place. And that's why around the same period of the 1700s, wigs became very popular, wearing gloves, heavy lead paint in makeup, the white makeup. I think that people were suffering from radiation sickness.
Mm.
Something, yeah, and I think that
Oh,
they
that's fascinating, Guy. I'd never thought about that piece. That's remarkable.
it's something that the more I look into it, the more it makes sense. You've
Mm.
got these parasitic families, these bloodline families and their friends that suddenly, almost like a cuckoo, take over these incredible buildings
Yeah.
after they have been, we've had mud floods, we've had what appears to be direct energy weapons, perhaps plasma, and there is radiation sickness going on. They're losing their teeth,
Yeah.
they're wearing wigs, and we're told they wore wigs because of hair lice. But these wigs were
Yes.
impossible to keep
Yeah.
clean.
Yes.
You know, they suddenly started losing their teeth because sugar became popular. Oh, come
Right.
on,
I heard that
it's
bullshit as
very
well.
weak. So
Very weak.
yeah, I think that I think we were, for want of a better expression, I think that some form of nuclear or atomic weaponry was used, and
Right.
I think that they plunged things into um, key ley lines, key points where we are living on a geomagnetic, geoelectric grid, and I think they spiked it. I
Yeah.
truly believe that they spiked that
Yeah.
and caused mud floods, quakes, and yeah.
Right. Easily enough done. We know we can do that even now. And so this kind of surreptitious geoengineering, things that we're now witnessing that are now becoming more mainstream, understood in the mainstream. That's just very kind of slow dialing in of transhumanism and being able to change and tinker with the genetics, the genetics of the planet. But this is so fascinating. Let's look at the human cost. So orphans as infrastructure. The orphan trains, perhaps the most haunting aspect of your work. If millions of children were displaced and stripped of their lineage and redistributed, is that simply tragedy, or is that population engineering? And what does it mean when memory is severed at the generational level? And before you answer that, let's also remember, and I'm telling the audience here, that there was no internet, there was no means of instant communication back in the day. There wasn't even telegraphy at that time. So, it took a long time for the word to get out. You could technically, if you were an archonic overlord species, you could wipe out an entire citadel, with millions of souls or hundreds of thousands of souls in it. And it would take years for that information to get 500 miles away. So, we have to consider as well the limitations in the transmission of information, knowledge, and wisdom at that time.
Yeah, the Cabbage Patch Babies and the orphan train movement, I believe, are all part and parcel of the same thing, and that also brings into the mix the incubator babies on exhibition in World's Fairs, and also baby farms. The most notorious would be the ones run by someone called Amelia Dyer, who happens to be the most notorious serial killer in British history because of the number of children that didn't quite make the cut, that weren't quite what these families were looking for. There could have been something about them that wasn't quite right. But they doubled the population between 1776 and 1876. The population doubled. Now that's one narrative. The other is, having dug into this, 3/4 of the population died. Some through natural causes, but the majority of people were being killed off through civil war and famine, and also the outbreak of different diseases like cholera, for example. So we have this explosion. They call it a baby boom. That all of a sudden people were conceiving a vast quantity of children, way more than is possible in natural methods. And this is where the human cloning enters, the Tartarian kind of realm, if you like. We see from Germany in the late 1800s postcards becoming incredibly popular, depicting children growing in cabbages and then being sold to middle and upper class couples. These slowly became known as repopulation postcards, and some of them started advertising babies being for sale. I actually have one here. I've started collecting these, and I only got this one actually this week. My wife.
I know the one you're going to show. Those two kids peering into that perambulator.
Yes. Yes.
There we go. I knew it.
Yeah.
Drop it down a little bit. Drop it down.
Wonder where mother bought it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people were buying children, buying babies.
Yeah.
And ironically, this all started in Germany. And I found what I believe to be a connection, and that is the kindergarten, a place where babies grow. And at the same time, the word doppelganger starts to be used.
Yes.
Another German word, for us looking very similar to somebody else. So I strongly believe that they were cloning, that these postcards actually depict children being grown en masse, a little bit like what Epstein was trying to do at Zorro Ranch. And that this may well go back, this technology may well go back all the way to Sumeria, where they talk about the Anunnaki tweaking our DNA and mass producing us as a slave race. So I think that these bloodline families have had this technology for some time. And so yes, so at the same time you've got this going on, you've got the sudden boom of orphans, but this was very cleverly done. You see, as I mentioned earlier on, they introduced the Lunacy Act. So at the same time as the civil wars, Napoleonic American civil wars, and civil wars that took place all over the world at exactly the same time, late 1700s, early 1800s, the Lunacy Act comes out. And one of the conditions in which you could be committed was losing your husband in battle. So your husband dies, you are automatically considered insane, your children are taken away, and they're shipped abroad. Now that happened worldwide. And my mother's father was from Crimea, and he was shipped with his sister to New York, ended up in Pennsylvania, and then was stationed here during the Second World War, met my grandmother. And so I actually have that in my family tree very recently, that, my grandfather was on the orphan trains. He was shipped, from Ukraine, as we call it today, to America, and was one of those kids. So yes, they by killing off the males through war and then incarcerating the women, they ended up with access to the children, new surname, new native tongue, new religion, a new history book, and they start again with a blank sheet effectively. And this is into the millions. Approximately 500,000 children were passengers on those trains that went from New York. Ultimately, most went to the Midwest. They were the workforce of the Industrial Revolution. Wow. Miners, a lot of them. Ironically, miners were miners.
So let's just bring this home. We've seen this happen in history under the Third Reich, and let's not get into that story and about the veracity of what we're told about who Hitler was and how many Jews actually died and how many blonde, blue-eyed Aryan boys actually died at that time. Let's not get into that bullshit right now. But the bit about genetic hybridization and genetic intervention, And then fast forward to Jeffrey Epstein and Zorro Ranch, as you mentioned a moment ago, something which is coming up now. And who or what is behind the inertia behind a Jeffrey Epstein seeding up to 20 women's wombs a day, purportedly, with babies. But presumably that was just the early onset of what his agenda was. Who and what is he operating at the behest of? That becomes a very interesting question. What kind of satanic, and I use that word absolutely, what kind of satanic force is involved in the ritual sacrifice of innocence and the blood and adrenochrome harvesting and the Wicca witchery and magic going on in that Sabbatean basement connected to Jeffrey Epstein, some of which is now surfacing, much of which will continue to surface in the days ahead, increasingly as those other 2.5 million files are released and the unredacted comes to light, or the redacted comes to light, forgive me. That is stuff that is going to be happening in real time in the coming weeks and months. And we better be prepared for it and brace ourselves for it. Because I'm trying to get at what is the extraterrestrial aspect. We speak in terms of Sabbatean, Babylonian, Mysterium cult, witches and wizards and satanic entities. These are temporal proxies. What is behind and above or below that? We're dealing, obviously, the Chitauri or the shape-shifting draconian imperial lizards and all of that stuff, Draco reptilians and greys, and all of the extraterrestrial element comes in now. So what, in your view, can you synthesize what kind of extraterrestrial, non-temporal intelligence or force, alien, is behind this cloning exercise and genetic hybridization exercise, which we've seen happen cyclically?
Well, we're told that it's the Greys, that this is information shared with the Greys, that the Greys are harvesting these children. But from my understanding, Epstein wanted to repopulate with human 2.0, and that what he was doing, it wasn't just his seed he was sowing. And some of these girls were like 14 years old. Some of these were children. But he was actually one of the roles that the island played was capturing the DNA or the sperm using the condoms from the visitors to the island. So you could then take them, and we're talking, top leading scientists that were working, on genetics at Harvard, all bankrolled by BlackRock. BlackRock are the people that were moving the money. And that's now come to light. But I think you imagine the position that this, who I believe to be a Mossad agent, that Epstein has on his island at these parties. You could take a condom that's been disposed of by, somebody with the most incredible mind. You could have access to a Hawkins and extract his DNA. And then you have this sort of mixing pot of a bit of Epstein, a bit of Hawkins, a bit of somebody else. And you could create this race of perfectly engineered people that have what they believe to be the best part of their DNA. And you then, and they believe, don't they, that people born around 2020, thousands of people born around 2020 are a direct result of that experiment, and that it continued long after Epstein had allegedly gone. I personally think he's still wandering around now.
Yeah.
But I think the technology is draconian. It's certainly alien to us, and that we are perhaps handing a vast number of these children to these beings in return for the technology.
So thank you for that, because to me, this subject couldn't be more important. I'm just going to quickly share a skit here, and bear with me on this. Can we see this? This is the International Tribunal.
David Seaman is founder of
This is the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, the court that I founded in 11 years ago in 2015. This is in 2018 in Westminster, Guy, when Robert David Steele and myself began exposing, through this Judicial Commission of Inquiry into human trafficking and child sex abuse, we were naming Epstein at that time.
Fulcrum News, which is an American research site. He is a journalist who was fired from the renowned Huffington Post for his groundbreaking story on Pizzagate. His continued commitment to advocating for civil liberties is a benchmark for journalism, and we welcome you, David, most heartily to this Judicial Commission of Inquiry into human trafficking and child sex abuse. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this man here, David Seaman, is to me the all-time hero. History will reflect that he is the man. He's the bravest of the brave out there. I don't know what's become of him, and I intend to look into it and try and find out. But he's the man that exposed the ritual satanic shit going on in the basement underneath the Obama, Clinton, those administrations.
And thanks for making this a focus. Of course, even the White House has published an executive order going into how widespread human trafficking is, what an epidemic it is. And there was just an article in the New York Post about how this is happening right underneath the people's noses on a scale that is frankly hard to fathom. So
I'm going to refer you now to the eminent chief counsel, Robert David Steele, who made the introduction between you and this commission. So, Robert, over to you.
I wasn't expecting to do anything other than say I think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. What you did with Pizzagate was monumental.
In any event, I just wanted to show that, because it is a desperately important subject. Ritual satanic stuff going on in our fucking basement is the premise, the cornerstone of why we are in such a dystopian tailspin and have been for such a long time. So, you know, your Cabbage Patch Kid piece and the eugenics exercises and the genetic hybridizations, all connected again down to blood sacrifice, sacrifice of innocence, harvest of humanity. And why? What do we have? What's in the blood? What's in our DNA? We know that DNA is a fractal antenna. We know that that antenna is directly connected and traverses the quantum field to distant galaxies and universes. So other intelligences, arguably billions of light years away and possibly even dimensions away from us, those other intelligences can and have and continue to vicariously live through the human experiment. So when you get a piece of shit Jeffrey Epstein taking the spermatoza from a venal turgid piece of shit called Bill Clinton and inseminating a 14 or 15-year-old, this is of course hypothetical, inseminating a 14 or 15-year-old girl's womb, what is coming through that? What are we being prepared for? What is this hybridization and genealogical hybridization and a project all about? Trying to open conduit, clearly, for these other dimensional, subdimensional, demonic, Saturnian intelligence to be able to come in again and hack the human condition and the human experiment for another cycle. To my mind, it's crystal clear. It's just very difficult to express this to anyone living in the mainframe. How much of that resonates with you guys?
All of it. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I've been talking about this online for the last few days. Actually, a few weeks ago, I put some information on my website that I couldn't put on social media because I knew it would just result in me being banned or shadow banned more than I already am. You know, for every post I put up, 5% of the people that follow me actually can see it. And yes, I absolutely agree with what you've said. This is satanic. I wonder whether or not the actual intention at Zorro Ranch and the cloning was to ultimately see if there was a means in which they could mass produce, like they did, I believe, before.
Yeah.
But rather than just with a standard human being, if it could be more advanced, more
Yeah.
perhaps what they consider to be more advanced, far more intelligent, carrying certain traits that they want and removing others, and at the same time removing the rest of us. So a repopulation, once again, yet another great reset, where they wipe us out. They continue to poison our air, our water, our food, inject as many people as possible, crank up 5G, make life unbearable for many. We've got mental health causing, perhaps its own pandemic, with suicide through the roof, along with cancer. Get rid of us. And then we have a load of little clones, a load of little Bill Clintons and Musks and Bransons wandering around, and Epsteins, and our children and our children's children are what they harvest.
Indeed. Well, perfectly stated. What to say? I'm going to try pull a card out here. We're 20 minutes over what was intended, but I tell you what, we haven't got to halfway of what I wanted to ask you about. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you're prepared to come back for another.
Absolutely.
Great. So, Christy, I just want to continue with this extraordinary man, and I'd like to also prepare some other images and slides and what have you, and do another piece with you, Guy. I'm just absolutely stunned. You've got a beautiful wealth of information. Certainly, I'm feeling redeemed and vindicated, because you're such an extraordinary researcher, but you're an author. Everything you're saying does dovetail also with everything that I've discovered and learned. I mean, I've been going into the kind of civilizational basement, kind of in a spiritual and metaphysical sense, trying to understand Canaanite ritualism and Molechite worship, and understanding blood sacrifice and what's at the prim. Growing up in a war, as I did in Africa, that's my backstory, is pretty grisly stuff. And coming into adulthood, wanting to learn about war, disease, and poverty, which is why I became a peace diplomat and advocate and a humanitarian, and then activist. And I don't call myself a researcher for one moment, but in the course of my inquiry and the thousands of conversations I have with very, very brilliant people, and the works that I do in advocacy, I've learned tremendously. So it's tantamount to research, living research, And I'm just very, very grateful to you, and honored to have met you. And curious to know what is the book that you're writing now or next?
Well, the book I'm currently working on is this is a schoolboy error, and this goes to show that, when I wrote my first book, I didn't really anticipate what was coming. It's about Tartaria, but I called it Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, because I wanted to connect people to understand that Tartaria isn't a rabbit hole, it's a warren, and Nikola Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Babies are key parts of this jigsaw puzzle. And so I thought I was being clever with the name. What I should have done is called it Tartaria. So I've decided to write a sequel called Tartaria. But since I wrote that first book, which is now it's just been published in Japan. I did a deal with a Japanese publisher. I've just done a deal with a German publisher. It's been published in Polish. As I said earlier on, David Icke's sons, Gareth and Jamie, are turning it into a documentary. I didn't think this was going to happen. And since I wrote that book, hundreds of people have contacted me and shared information. I've been given names of people who worked on the buildings that were actually involved with cymatics, that had blueprints, that's grandparents were killed because of the information they had. I've been given all of this, so I've decided to publish it all.
Beautiful.
All of the information that as a net result, ended the lives of hundreds of people for just possessing it. I'm going to share it with the world.
Amazing. Well, because that's the next piece I want to do. I want to go into the engineering. I want to go into the calculus, the mathematics, the ratios. I want to go into the electrification, cold versus hot, yin versus. I want to get into that piece, that dialectic, and I want to go into escaping the matrix, fractals, memory, and the physics of ascension, and see where that dovetails with the studies that you've done, and with how we remember ourselves through the thrall of this Saturnian deep sleep or galactic sleep cycle, how we emerge into the light and remember fully, as you are a living personification, embodiment of this great mystery of remembrance of the past age. But I really want to dive deeply into that, understand a lot more about the mechanics of it, and the cymatics you just raised. The cymatics, this to me is also, obviously one could do an entire film or documentary series just on the cymatics alone, and frequency generation, the organs and the fireplaces and the chimneys. And I'd love to go into the architecture, because bioresonance and bioarchitecture is one of the critical focuses of the New Earth movement, the New Earth Project, has been for many years. So I'd love to get you into that space next.
Yeah, I'd love to. That's actually where I spend most of my research, actually looking at cymatics, frequency, how they and how they constructed these buildings, and why. Why did they do it? Why do we see these copper domes?
Right.
What was inside? What is Antiquitech? How were they harnessing energy?
Right.
You know, what were they doing? Even the streets were electric. It's
Exactly.
very similar to Scalextrics.
Exactly. Hovering vehicles, all that. These
Yeah.
are all slides in my standard lecture I've been doing for the last 3-4 years. That particular piece showing the electric vehicles and the electro buses and the and the hovering electrogravitic conveyances that were used in these cities. Staggering stuff, and all around the world. You know,
Yes.
and then you can even go back. I also want to look at signature historical nodes like Queen of Sheba, you know, and Solomon, King Solomon.
Yes.
I think it's really interesting to get into some of these archetypal historical figures and to do a deep dive. And it would be good to also get some remote viewers and heavy clairvoyants and sensitives to do some triangulations there. Wouldn't that be a fun show?
That would be fantastic, yes. And with regard to King Solomon, then that is one of the few things I did learn about when I joined the Freemasons. I never got to find out any of the answers to the questions I wanted.
Give us the baseline on King Solomon.
Well, King Solomon, the reason for Freemasonry is King Solomon. His architect was Hiram Abiff.
Yes.
And Hiram Abiff was murdered because he wouldn't hand over information to three ruffians, they're referred to as. They were all called Julian or Jules. They were the Jays. Now, when the murders took place connected to Jack the Ripper, which a lot of people believe were Masonic, there was a piece of graffiti by one of them on a wall, and it said, "Those are the Jews, they won't take blame for anything." But Jews wasn't spelt Jews, it was the Jays, the Julians. It was those that they were making reference to.
Yes.
And it was these women were being sacrificed on behalf of Hiram Abiff being murdered by these three ruffians. And that's what actually it connected to. So the reason that Freemasons wear mourning suits when they go to a lodge meeting is because they are in mourning for Hiram Abiff, the first Grand Master. And he was considered so noble and so intelligent by King Solomon that he was buried inside the wall of the temple, where that was a place for only members of the royal family and priests.
Right.
But he was considered worthy enough and literally worshipped by King Solomon. And the temple is where the stonemasons used to go to be paid. And they would stand between two pillars, which are present in anything Masonic. There were always the two pillars and the checkerboard floor. That is where they went to be paid by King Solomon for their work.
Right.
So I found out quite a bit about King Solomon and Hiram Abiff, the first master, if you like, Grand Master, who, it is alleged, was given the knowledge by the Atlanteans.
Right. Very good. Well, you know, it's just extraordinary, isn't it, how abstruse and complex and labyrinthine that whole kind of mysterium tradition became, in the whole business of trying to control the angelic indigo human and subjugate us through witchery and dissonance, through that checkerboard, the kingdom of the devil, the black and white, and who's controlling the black hat element and who's controlling the white hat element.
Yes.
Never the twain shall meet, or do they indeed meet in a conspiracy, you know, in the basement constantly over cigars, you know, with top hats. the kind of thing. It's crystal clear that whole duality theater of life is a premise upon which each of us, if we return to innocence into the lens of our heart and move on to that checkerboard, we don't participate on either the black or the white. We remain on the indivisible line between the two, and we conduct right action. We stand in pure truth, in the geometry of the living moment, which is the path of least resistance to the highest outcome, always, in all ways. Guy Anderson, such a delight to meet you today, brother, and I can't wait to take this conversation forward.